Another US government shutdown is looming, and markets are treating it like any other Wednesday. They're expecting the same confected tantrum Washington has thrown 21 times before. But they might be missing the real story.
What is the real story?
A bombshell memo from the Trump administration has revealed a plan to weaponize this situation in a way that's never been done, turning a temporary crisis into a tool for permanent change. So, stay tuned for the full story of Washington's latest shutdown, what it means for the markets, and why this time might be different. My name is Guy, and you're watching The Coin Bureau. First things first though, none of this is financial advice, it's just educational content intended to inform you about how dysfunctional the US government is. And if you want us to keep you updated on Washington shenanigans, then smash that like button to give us a boost in your algorithm. Okay, so let's start with a bit of background. America's government shutdown machine runs on an 1880s law that was plainly never meant for shutting down the government. It's called the Anti-Deficiency Act, and it was supposed to stop government agencies from overspending. Simple enough, you can't spend money Congress hasn't given you. For a century, it was universally understood that this meant agencies should be careful with their budgets. Then, in 1880, Attorney General Benjamin Civiletti looked at this law and started getting some funny ideas. If Congress hadn't appropriated money, why should the government keep running? Maybe the responsible thing to do is just call time out, stop everything except essential services, and send workers home. Before 1980, funding gaps were administrative hiccups. Agencies kept running while Congress sorted things out. After Civiletti's tenure, however, they became crises. The US government had shut down exactly 0 times before 1980. Since then, it's happened 21 times. A second breakthrough came in 1995, when House Speaker Newt Gingrich discovered you could use shutdowns as leverage. The Clinton administration wanted one thing, Gingrich wanted another, and for 21 days, the government went dark. Now, Gingrich lost that fight politically, but he'd also just invented a new game of constitutional hardball, using procedural weapons in ways that technically follow the rules, but violate every norm of governance and are kind of nuts. By 2013, government shutdowns had become routine enough that Ted Cruz could hog the remote for 16 days trying to defund Obamacare. He knew that he'd lose eventually. Everyone knew he'd lose. The point, though, was the fight itself. The shutdown had evolved from crisis to strategy. The 2018 to 2019 shutdown pushed things further. Trump wanted $5.7 billion for his border wall, Democrats said no, and for 35 days, the longest shutdown in American history, 800,000 federal workers went without pay. The government held itself hostage in a fight over immigration policy. Each shutdown made the next one easier. The unthinkable became uncomfortable, then annoying, then normal. Congress now passes 47 continuing resolutions per decade just to keep the lights on. The world's most powerful government runs on temporary patches and recurring crises. So, fast forward to today, where the marathon shutdown of Trump's first term is our best preview of what could happen as soon as this Wednesday. 35 days is long enough to move past the theatrical phase into actual systemic breakdown. Long enough to see which parts of government matter the most and which workers are at the bottom of the pile. For context, during the 2018 to 2019 shutdown, those 800,000 federal workers discovered they fell into 2 categories. About 400,000 were furloughed, sent home, told not to work, not even to check email. Another 400,000 were considered essential and forced to keep working without pay. Air traffic controllers guided planes, Secret Service agents protected officials, prison guards watched inmates, all working on IOUs. TSA agents earning $25,000 a year were supposed to keep airports secure while their own bills went unpaid. Hundreds called in sick. Security lines at Atlanta Airport stretched for hours. New York's LaGuardia Airport nearly closed. The people responsible for aviation security were driving Ubers in order to pay rent. The FDA stopped routine food inspections, the SEC stopped reviewing IPO applications, and the IRS stopped processing returns during tax season. Immigration courts cancelled 86,000 hearings, adding years to a system already drowning in backlogs. National parks stayed open but unstaffed, leading to overflowing toilets and damaged ecosystems at Yellowstone and Joshua Tree. Meanwhile, small businesses discovered what non-essential really meant. For reference, the Small Business Administration processes about $200 million in loans daily. During the shutdown, that fell to zero. This meant fishermen couldn't get fishing permits, breweries couldn't get approvals for new products, and much more besides. When the standoff finally ended in 2019 and the government was switched back on, the Congressional Budget Office calculated the damage. The shutdown, they said, had cost the US $11 billion reduction in GDP, including $3 billion in permanently lost economic activity. Luckily for federal workers, the Government Employee Fair Treatment Act guaranteed back pay. So that meant taxpayers paid 800,000 people not to work for 5 weeks, then paid them anyway. Meanwhile, the government contractors who clean offices and serve food, and the small businesses that lost contracts, got nothing. The last 3 shutdowns cost taxpayers nearly $4 billion in back pay alone, paying people for work that was never done. It ended when LaGuardia was hours from closing and the Super Bowl was approaching. The prospect of grounding flights for America's biggest sporting event was too much even for Washington to stomach. Politicians caved, Trump reopened the government without his wall money, and everyone carried on like nothing ever happened.
Hello, it's me, Guy's cousin Barry. I'm very sorry to be interrupting this no doubt fascinating video, but I want to tell you about the Coin Bureau deals page, so listen up and listen well. Alright, this is the place where you will find all the amazing promos and discounts what you, as Coin Bureau viewers, are entitled to. So don't be a mug, go and check it out using the link below. You'll find discounts on hardware wallets, you'll find exchange sign-up bonuses, some of which are absolutely bleeding mental, and you will find trading fee discounts there as well as a whole load of other goodies too. And let me tell you, old Barrington here, he's had to hammer the dog and bone all bleeding day and night to get you these promos and discounts. So you're welcome, thank you very much, go and have a look, pronto, or I'll have to come and have a word. Alright.
Now, historically, shutdowns have been triggered by Republicans holding out over spending or immigration. The fight this time, though, is over healthcare, and in a double plot twist, it's the Democratic Party threatening to pull the plug. They want healthcare subsidies extended and recent Medicaid cuts reversed. Dems control enough Senate votes to block any funding bill, and they're using that leverage. Republicans, on the other hand, want a clean continuing resolution, just keeping the lights on at current levels until November, then fight about healthcare later. But House Minority Leader Chuck Schumer is under pressure from his base after looking weak in the last budget fight, and his Senate counterpart Hakeem Jeffries has his entire caucus in line. They're betting that since Republicans control the White House and both chambers of Congress, voters will blame them for any shutdown. And if you're wondering where President Trump sits in all of this, he recently cancelled scheduled talks with Democratic Party leaders, tweeted that, quote, "the Democrats are crazed," and warned that this shutdown could be a long one. Not exactly de-escalation then. Both sides think they win politically from a shutdown, at least in the short term. Democrats get to show they're putting up a fight, Trump gets to portray Democrats as obstructionists, and nobody's even pretending to negotiate. At the time of shooting, everyone is digging trenches for what could be a very long fight. So, it's looking just like any other trip to the shutdown circus. Or at least it was until Trump's Office of Management and Budget dropped a bombshell memo that raised the stakes dramatically. This memo directs federal agencies to prepare for reductions in force, or RIFs in government speak. Not furloughs, not temporary layoffs, permanent elimination of positions. A furlough means you come back when the shutdown ends. A RIF means your job went extinct. The key line from the memo instructs agencies to focus cuts on programs, quote, not consistent with the president's priorities. So, Congress appropriates money for specific programs, the president doesn't like some of them, and he uses a shutdown, which only happens because Congress couldn't agree on new funding, to permanently eliminate the programs Congress already funded. This is a constitutional hardball turning into constitutional warfare. In every previous shutdown, there was a mutual understanding that it would all blow over eventually. Workers would return, programs would restart, life would continue. Even the longest shutdowns were temporary inconveniences, not government restructuring programs. The mechanics of RIFs make this particularly daring. As we discussed earlier, agencies furlough workers based on what's essential for safety and security. With RIFs, agencies choose who to fire based on tenure, performance ratings, and, crucially, which programs the administration wants to kill. Put simply, it transforms the shutdown from a pause button into a delete key. Federal employee unions are already mobilizing, recognizing this as the sequel to Elon Musk's attempt to reduce government spending earlier this year. The American Federation of Government Employees calls it, quote, an unprecedented attack on the civil service. Academics, meanwhile, have a term for this: executive aggrandizement. It's when the executive branch expands its power at the expense of the legislature, not through courts or violence, but through the manipulation of legal mechanisms. You use crises, legal grey areas, and any other procedural lever available to concentrate power. Democrats know they're playing into Trump's hands, and now that he's threatening to use their shutdown as the pretext for a mass firing, the wisdom of sticking to one's guns here is questionable. There is a case to be made for caving to avoid Trump's weaponization tactics. Then again, though, caving would validate these very tactics, encouraging Trump and future presidents to play this card again in the future. So let us know in the comments who is stupider in this situation and how you expect this all to play out. From our perspective, it's just dizzying that, oh no, the president is threatening to hijack our perfectly normal government shutdown is even a serious conversation to be had, but, well, it is what it is. Now, for all this constitutional drama, markets are greeting the shutdown threat with a yawn. And history tells them they're right to ignore it. During the 2013 shutdown, the S&P 500 gained 3%. During the 35-day marathon in 2018 to 2019, it went up more than 10%. The average return across all shutdowns since 1976 is exactly 0. Now look at what happens after shutdowns end. 12 months later, the data show the S&P 500 higher in the overwhelming majority of cases, with an average return of around 13%. Markets have learned that shutdowns are political theatre with a predictable ending. Someone blinks, the government reopens, life goes on, number goes up. Even volatility stays muted. The Volatility Index, or VIX, a widely used measure of expected volatility in US markets, might tick up before deadlines, but when the government actually shuts down, you'd be better off watching paint dry. Shutdowns barely register as market events anymore. VIX scores above 30 indicate fear and uncertainty. The index hit 82 during the 2008 financial crisis and 65 during the pandemic. But during shutdowns, you'd be lucky to catch it spiking above 20. And below 20, you're firmly in nobody cares territory. Markets focus on what actually drives returns: corporate earnings, Federal Reserve policy, global growth. A shutdown doesn't change Apple's iPhone sales or Google's ad revenue. The Fed keeps functioning regardless. The economy keeps running because the government shutdown only affects discretionary spending, which is about 25% of the federal budget. Social security checks keep coming. Medicare keeps sending money. The military stays funded. Bond payments continue. The stuff that would actually crash markets, a default on treasury bonds for instance, isn't on the table. That's a debt ceiling fight, not a shutdown fight, though people tend to confuse the two. JP Morgan's take is typical of the view from Wall Street. Shutdowns create, quote, headline risk, but not fundamental risk. Translation: they generate scary news stories, but don't actually threaten the financial system. Traders have been conditioned by the last 21 shutdowns to see them as good entries, not signals to sell everything and batten down the hatches. But there is something markets might be missing. Credit rating agencies have started re-evaluating the significance of these government tantrums, no longer as temporary disruptions, but as evidence of, quote, governance erosion. Moody's specifically mentioned fiscal brinkmanship when explaining their negative outlook on US credit. Fitch cited, quote, repeated debt limit political standoffs when they downgraded US debt in 2023. Each new entry in the shutdown law, each escalation that becomes precedent adds a tiny bit to America's sovereign risk premium. It's not visible day to day. Markets don't price in institutional decay the way they price in earnings reports. But compound this over decades and they'll contribute to a permanent increase in government borrowing costs. When the world's so-called risk-free rate becomes slightly less risk-free, everything reprices eventually. So, markets are probably right that the latest shutdown won't cause a crash in financial asset prices, but they're probably wrong that it doesn't matter at all. Stock prices reflect corporate earnings, which barely budge during shutdowns. GDP reflects actual economic activity, which absolutely does. Estimates from the Congressional Budget Office and Goldman Sachs calculate the damage at about 0.1% to 0.2% for every week of government outage, and it bears repeating that a good chunk of that damage is permanent. Markets don't care because the damage hits places they don't track. Federal workers missing paychecks don't show up in Apple's quarterly earnings. Small businesses losing federal loans don't affect Google's ad revenue. The economic pain is real but diffuse, concentrated in government-dependent communities and industries that barely register in market indices dominated by tech giants. The data blindness alone creates cascading problems. When the Bureau of Labor Statistics stops publishing employment numbers and the Bureau of Economic Analysis stops releasing GDP data, the Federal Reserve loses its ability to see what's happening in the economy. You can't steer a ship without reading the instruments. The Fed could end up in policy paralysis or making interest rate decisions based on stale information, increasing the risk of policy mistakes. Small businesses discover they're more dependent on the government than they thought. The Small Business Administration's $200 million in daily financing vanishes. For a small manufacturer waiting on a loan to make payroll or a restaurant expanding to a second location, the timing can be fatal. These aren't delays you can make up later. The business either survives without the loan or it doesn't. Federal contractors are in a particularly unenviable spot. Unlike federal employees who get guaranteed back pay, contractors get nothing, and many of them are among the lowest paid federal workers to begin with. As you might expect, the damage is greatest in economies built around federal facilities. The Washington, D.C. metro area houses 15% of all federal workers. When the government shuts down, cities like Huntsville, Alabama, home to NASA, can just grind to a halt. Local businesses that depend on federal workers as customers see revenue crater overnight. The 2018 to 2019 shutdown showed this clearly. Washington, D.C. area restaurants reported 20 to 60% revenue drops. Federal workers stopped buying coffee, stopped eating lunch out, stopped everything that wasn't absolutely essential. Multiply that across every community with a major federal presence, and you get billions in lost economic activity that never comes back. So then, what happens next? Well, if no deal is reached by 11:59 p.m. on the 30th of September, today, the government begins shutdown procedures. Non-essential employees get furlough notices. National parks close. Federal courts run on reserve funds that last about 2 weeks. The key thing to watch will be which agencies get RIF notices first. Don't be surprised if the Department of Education gets mass layoffs while Department of War contractors stay paid. If the shutdown runs past 2 weeks, then GDP damage starts compounding. If the estimates are right, a month-long shutdown could cost 0.8% of growth, potentially tipping a slowing economy into recession. Historically, public opinion breaks against whoever looks the most obstinate. In 2018 to 2019, Trump's approval hit its presidency low. This time, though, both parties are welcoming confrontation, and it's anyone's guess who takes the blame. And guess what? This shutdown is probably just the rehearsal. There's a debt ceiling fight looming next spring, not about spending levels, but about borrowing authority. Remember, a government shutdown is a self-imposed pause on future discretionary spending, which is embarrassing and disruptive. A debt ceiling breach, however, would be a default on financial obligations the US has already made. This would shatter trust in the foundation of the global financial system, likely causing credit markets to freeze, the value of the dollar to plummet, and US interest rates to skyrocket. That is a recipe for a severe recession and a global financial crisis. So it would be wise to do everything possible to avoid this, including not periodically shutting down the government over basic funding decisions. But the circus must go on, I suppose. Or off, in this case. Anyway, if you want to learn more about countries spiralling into debt traps, then why not check out this video on the $324 trillion global crisis right over here. That's all from me for now, though. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. This is Guy, over and out.